Welcome to the Manufacturing Masters Podcast with your host, Allison DeFord.
As a leader, has there been any one thing in your life that you felt like changed the entire trajectory of your path? Well, today's guest has one of the most amazing stories I think I've ever heard. He came across a story over 25 years ago that completely changed his life. And he has since turned it into a successful business, coaching practice. He speaks all over the country and world. And he is helping people like you with leadership, sales, and employee engagement. And this extended cut episode is jam-packed with story, with experience, with tools and techniques that you can use to really change the way that you lead and the outcome. And make sure you wait until the end. Mike shares a very personal story. It will be a mic drop moment. So I ask you to stay with us to the end and learn from Antarctic Mike Pierce. He's leading at 90 degrees below zero. He is going to help you overcome challenges, which is the number one constant in manufacturing. Thank you, by the way, for spending a little time today with us, investing time in yourself and your business. You are a master and you are making a difference. Everybody, here we grow. Ooh, here we go. Well, this is a special treat for everybody listening and watching. This guy goes at Mach 10 all the time. So to have him on our podcast today, I feel is a true gift for many reasons, which you will find out momentarily. Antarctic Mike, thank you for being here.
It's really an honor to be with you, Allison, and to be with the viewers.
Well, you are a master storyteller. That is one of the things that I love about you. And I think what people will find in listening to you, some people are good at explaining things. You have a way of just, I'm on the edge of my seat. And I love that. I mean, it's a true craft. And what I find when I'm listening to you is I can't wait to see what you're going to say next. And then I'm so stoked by the information, the technique, the whatever it is you're talking about. It's very like, that makes so much sense to me. I want to go implement that. Like, I don't know, my words aren't here today, but I think you know what I'm getting at. It's very useful. It's very tangible. So I'm excited for you to share with the manufacturers that tune in. You are all about leadership, sales, employee engagement. You speak all over the world. And I feel like let's share a bit of your story so people know why you're called Antarctic Mike. And this is like, to me, this is a crazy cool story. So why the Antarctic? Let everybody know, like, what's that all about? And how did that get you to where you are today?
It's kind of the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Right? Or in the
Zoom. Well, especially given the fact that I reside in a place called San Diego. Right. Now, for the viewers, they're a little geographically challenged. San Diego is not located in the country of Canada or Siberia, right? It's obviously at the end of California near Mexico. Yeah. So it is ironic that people spend a fortune to come to this part of the world to get out of places like the Antarctic. And yet here's the guy that lives there that absolutely loves it. That's the irony, and I think that's part of what created the brand and the power. But the whole thing started, I was teaching a leadership course at a company that I worked for about 20 years ago, and I ran into an Antarctic history story at a bookstore in August of 2001. And the story was called Shackleton's Way. And it was the story of the Endurance, which was an expedition that launched in 1914. And 28 people got stranded in Antarctica for 2 years. 2 years. And they all came home alive. And the characteristics of Shackleton as the leader, you know, being responsible for all 27 others on the team was so compelling, I couldn't put it down. And I saw the connection between what they did in 1914 at the end of the world and what leaders today are responsible for in the year 2024. And so I bought the book, and I bought another one, and I became hooked on these stories from the polar regions of the world, both the Antarctic, which is south, and the Arctic, which is north. And then I decided I wanted to, and I created this course for my company internally, and it became a smash hit overnight. And that's when the light bulb went off, and I said, you know what? I've got to get this to the rest of the real world. But in order to have credibility, I had to go to Antarctica. I mean, how can I talk about it if I haven't been there? Mm-hmm. So I made a decision in 2005 to go and participate in what they called the first ever Antarctic Ice Marathon. It was a 26.2 mile marathon that was going to take place on an ice shelf located 600 miles from the South Pole. I hadn't run a marathon in 20 years. So I was not one of these experienced veteran marathon runners. All the other people that went on this trip with me I was the anomaly. And so I went and I did that. And then a year later, I went back because I decided to give a try at what they called the Antarctic Ultra Marathon. An ultra marathon is technically anything longer than a marathon. It could be 50 kilometers, which is about 31 miles. It could be 100 miles. I mean, they go to 10,000 miles, literally. This one was 100 kilometers, which is 62 miles. And so I went back a year later and I ran that. And Antarctica just became, you know, synonymous with me. And the comic part of the story is that because I live in San Diego and my wife Angela was not going to relocate, she was not going to Canada or Siberia or International Falls, Minnesota. I had to train for this in San Diego. Now, of course, how on earth are you going to acclimate to the climate,
right,
when you live in San Diego, right? Well, the answer to the question is you find a freezer. So I literally picked up the yellow page phone book. I am dating myself here. For those of you, I know some of you watching this, you don't know what I'm talking about. They used to make this really big, thick book with loads of phone numbers in it. That's how you basically...
Oh, we got a little bit of frozen.
And the phone call sounded this, literally. Hi, this is Antarctic Mike. They call me that because I'm a big fan of Ernest Shackleton, and I've decided to follow him to Antarctica, and I signed up to run a marathon on an ice shelf located 600 miles from the South Pole, and I want to train in your freezer. That's literally how the phone call sounded. And you can imagine the faces on the other end of this line, right?
They thought, this guy's nuts.
I finally talked like he escaped from the state hospital or get him his meds or call 911. Right. And so I ended up talking my way into a cold storage facility in San Diego. And I trained in there for 2 years. And the funny part of the real value of the freezer is that the value really had little, if anything, to do with acclimating to the cold. Because the truth of the matter is the human body is a very good heater. And it really is. And you have to capture the heat. So I had plenty of layers of merino wool and fleece and Gore-Tex. I mean, I practically looked like an astronaut. The point is, if I had never gone in the freezer, I would have been fine in Antarctica as far as the temperature goes. But the real value of the freezer was training the mental muscles. You see, because the freezer at its longest point was 59 feet long. That's all I had. And it would be back and forth, 59 feet at a time, training for a marathon, 26.2 miles, and an ultra marathon, which in this case was 62 miles. And people are thinking, the mental monotony, this guy is a screwball, right? I mean, how can you withstand this, right? But what that did, it really taught me the value of difficulty. Because as a little kid, I grew up in a city called Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour outside of Philadelphia. And one night, this was in 1976, I was 11 years old. My hockey coach pulled me aside and he said, Mike, you're going to play the game the way you practice. If you make the practice harder, the game goes easier. I can picture that conversation today in the year 2024 like it was yesterday. This was like what helped me with the math. 24 from 76 is about 25. That's almost 50 years. It's 48 years to be exact. 48 years ago, I had that conversation, and I remember it like it was yesterday. And what he was telling me was, look at difficulty differently. Look at this as an ally, not as an enemy. Look at difficulty as something to move toward, not away from. That paradigm shift changed everything in my life. Little did I know it. And I was only 11 years old. Now it's X number of years later, and I'm in the freezer doing this. And I remembered that. And then I started looking forward to this. And I know it worked because when I did. I looked at that freezer like, this is a chance to build these muscles. These muscles are the most important muscle in the body of any human being, not just an athlete, but anybody. And so it really changed everything. And I know it worked because when I got to Antarctica, it took me 7 hours and 15 minutes to run the marathon. But what went through my mind when I finished was this. Is that all there is? 7 hours seemed more like 7 minutes because I changed my whole paradigm. I changed my definition of difficulty. I changed the lens that I looked through, and it changed everything on the other side of the lens, right? That's why people wear corrective lenses, because you want to change what you see on the other side, right? And that paradigm shift was like a lens, and it changed everything in my life. I mean, everything. It changed my marriage. It changed my profession. It changed everything in my whole life, professionally and personally.
And do you feel like it was the overarching experience of everything, the collective of the training, and then the experience of actually running it, as coupled with this obsession and interest in the stories from that region? Or was that aha moment after you actually ran the marathon?
It's hard to separate the components of the experience, but I will say this. 98% of the value of the entire experience was gained in the freezer. 98% of it. That's where I really changed my mind. The Antarctic portion was just validation that the freezer changed me, and it gave me credibility. If I didn't actually follow through and go and do what I said I was going to do, I wouldn't have credibility. So going to Antarctica gave me the credibility, and it gave me the validation that the freezer worked, that it changed these muscles. And so, but the real value of changing me as a person was gained in the freezer. Absolutely gained in the freezer. That's why you look at NFL players, and they'll tell you, the ones that win the Super Bowl, they'll tell you they won the Super Bowl in the preseason, right? Because they'll tell you that all the practicing and all the hard stuff that most fans don't realize they go through, that kind of experience is what builds these muscles that enables them to win the Super Bowl. And I think that's so that the freezer was really my preseason, let's call it, in if we use that metaphor. And so but it's hard to separate the two because they're like the left and the right wing of the same airplane.
Well, and on that topic, so this is one of the things that I would love for you to teach our listeners. So as manufacturing leaders, you share the story of endurance and the 1914 team that survived. And I want to help our listeners see difficulty differently, because that's the beginning, right, of becoming a better leader, which then affects, like, to me, this is that preseason component that you've got to start with. So let's go into that for a minute.
Well, I'll start by saying this, and I just thought of this on the spot. Ernest Shackleton, my hero that led that expedition in 1914, one of the things he said was this: I love it when things are hard, and I hate it when things are easy.
Ooh.
And I think if we translate this into manufacturing masters podcast speak, let's call it, in this particular segment, I would say this. One of the things that you have to learn to let go of, you have to learn to let go of easy. Not that you don't ever need a break, not that you don't ever need rest, not that you don't ever need respite. You do. But I think in general, and it reminds me of the story of a guy named Todd Drake, who's one of my best friends, and he's a customer of mine in Iowa, and he's in the cattle business. They manage cattle feeding programs. And Todd's grown up with cattle farms his whole life, his whole father, grandfather, everybody going way back, right? And one of the things he said to me about the farmer, he said, the thing that I see in farmers is that they taught me, my grandparents, my parents, my great-grandparents, they all taught me this, to respect hard things. And I think if you look at our world today, you look at all the problems in our society. You know, the news wants you to think it's the Biden people versus the Trump people. It's the masked people versus the unmasked, the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated. You know, that's what they want you to think, right?
Right.
That's not the problem. The problem is we have lost a lot of respect for the hard things in our world today. Look at how we've taken ourselves off the hook. I mean, we have Amazon that will enable you to get what you want by 5 o'clock today if you spend $25 or more. I mean, it's like, and it's instant. You can push a button on a stupid telephone and it shows up, right? Everybody wants everything now. They want it more convenient. They want it easier and less hassle. And I understand, I'm not saying that efficiency is bad, but the price that we've paid for efficiency, technology, working smarter, not harder, we can call it anything we want.
Yeah.
Part of the problem is we've enabled ourselves to have a lack of respect for hard things. And I think to compensate for that, we have to learn to let go of easy. We have to learn to embrace the hard and let go of what's easy. There's another speaker, I can't remember his name. He's a guy I met years ago. He wrote a book called Take the Stairs. And it's the whole concept of doing the hard stuff instead of getting on the elevator. It's the same principle. And he's very popular. And it's the same principle in play in that as a person, you know, we're better off by being able to master hardship, by being able to because, right, difficulty is going to come into our lives whether we like it or not, right? Whether it's financial, medical, whatever it is, right? Marital, parental, right? Difficulty shows up every day in our lives. The question is, are we ready? Are we prepared? Because when it shows up, you're going to respond. And you're either going to be able to respond favorably or unfavorably, right? It's like if the weight is coming at you, you can either push it or it pushes you, right? There's not a lot of middle ground. And I think the probability of us being able to push the weight successfully is conditional upon how well conditioned we are to be able to push that weight. And I think the more that we embrace things that are hard and let go of the easy, it builds all the muscles in the body, especially the mind, to be able to withstand the forces that come at us, whether it's called change or anything that's hard. It enables us to be able to not only withstand it, but get through it successfully and make it work to our advantage. So I think letting go of things that are easy is a big lesson that I learned by my Antarctic experience. And it was modeled by my hero, Ernest Shackleton, in 1914.
Well, it reminds me of, and help me out here, is it the Marines that say embrace the suck? That's the phrase that came into my brain when you were saying that. Is, I think, I guess I should ask this as a question and not a statement. Do you feel like this is a mindset shift, first and foremost?
Yes.
You make
Yes,
the decision, right?
Yes.
To see difficulty differently, to respect hard more than you do easy, and
Correct.
to be willing to lean in to things that are hard, because you know the challenges are coming. Like you
Correct.
say, One of the things that you say, and I think it's very true, is the number one constant in manufacturing is challenges. Whether it's with the SKUs or the sales.
Yes, I'm going to show you something in a minute that's going to really visually illustrate this principle. I do think
cool.
it's like turning a light switch in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
It's a decision that we have full control over that says, it's like putting on a pair of glasses.
Mm-hmm.
I have full capability to choose which glass I'm going to look through, whether it's nothing or something, right? Can you go get my glasses over there? This picture was the original picture that was on the cover of the book that I saw in the bookstore in August of 2001. And this was probably the reason why those 28 people came home alive. Because the ship, you can see over here, is locked in the ice.
Mm-hmm.
And they tried feverishly to get that ship out of the ice. And I mean, it was like taking a bucket of sand to the beach, because that ship was locked in 20 feet of solid sea ice. And so, obviously, trying to free it would be like taking a bottle of water, standing on the roof of a hotel when the fire's coming. It's not going to work. So what Shackleton did was he taught those guys to let this go. That ship represents everything in your life that you can't control. And the last time I checked, that's a pretty extensive list for most of us, right?
Yeah.
A lot of things we can't control. And he taught them to focus on what they could control, which was their response to the circumstance. They have full control over this, just like I have full control over this. And when I put this on, it changes everything in front of me. And I think that decision that you just talked about is like this. I can do this at will. No matter what the circumstance, I can do that. And I think that's a very good analogy for what you just said.
Well, now I want to make sure we describe. So for people that are just listening to this and they could not see the picture that you held up, explain quickly what is happening in the picture that you just held up.
Okay, in this picture, these are members of the Endurance crew. They were all on the ship.
Okay.
And as the ship sailed down from South Georgia Island south towards Antarctica, it got locked in the ice. And the ice was much thicker than they were expecting. And so they weren't expecting the boat to get stuck in the ice like this. Or if it got stuck, they were expecting the ice would break apart and they'd be able to proceed.
Yeah.
The irony is, when that boat got stuck, they were only 20 miles from Antarctica. They'd come that far. They went 12,000 miles. They left London, England. London, England to Antarctica is 12,000 miles. When they were less than 20 miles from their goal is when the boat got stuck. And so after trying to free the ship for days, Shackleton, he knew there was no hope for the ship. He knew this was a factor far past their control. As good as they are, as hard as they worked, it wasn't going to move the needle. And so he said, look, I have to make sure the mindset of my people can continue to move forward no matter what. Mm-hmm. Because mentally, if you don't keep moving forward, it's over. And I think that he decided then to engage in this game.
So they're playing a game like soccer, football, something.
Correct. Yeah, they call it football in England, but it's soccer to the Americans. And he got them to engage in this game because he took their mind off of what they could not control and focused it on what they could. Because I think he knew in the ensuing days and weeks and months to come, he was going to need their minds to be thinking about what can we do, not what can't we do. And I think that was probably the brilliance of this guy Shackleton. In my opinion, this is the most powerful picture in the entire story. This picture, I give a copy of this picture to every participant in every audience I've ever had since I started telling this story 20 years ago. And I tell people right across the top, let go. People have copies of this picture hanging on their walls, in their offices. It's in my second bedroom of my house. It's on a piece of canvas, 2 feet by 3 feet. It's that impactful because it basically, every time you see that picture, you think about, what do I have to let go of? And there's loads of things to let go of. When we can get into that too. I mean, we could talk about the top 10 things that you need to let go of every day to make your life better. I mean, there's loads of things to let go of. I don't think we need a whole lot of explanation on this one. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Most people know this. I mean, think about a marriage, right? Think about this. Let's say Allison and I are not getting along, okay? Now we get into something called a fight, where you have loud words and bad words you don't want the kids to hear, right? The little voice on this side of my head says, hey, Mike, drop it. Let it go. Don't make a big deal out of this, right? And of course, the competing voice on this side of my head says, yeah, but you're right. And of course, anytime you know that you're right, that's the justification to keep fighting. And then I say, wait a minute. I've seen this movie far too many times. This is the wisdom. I'm going to drop it. So then if I decide to let it go and drop it, what happens? The volume level starts to go down. So I can have a real conversation.
Right.
Hey, and we still like each other. Wow, it's like magic, right? Not really. It's what happens when somebody makes a decision to let go. It's amazing how letting go it changes marriages. It changes everything in your life. I mean, we carry the things that we don't let go of become like rocks in the backpack.
Oh, yeah.
And boy, small rocks become real heavy as the hill starts getting longer and steeper, right? And the hills of life get longer and steeper as the time goes on. And those rocks then can become an inhibitor. And all of a sudden, the 6-cylinder engine that we're running on is firing on 5 or 4 or 3 cylinders, right? And if we're not careful, those rocks can become like anchors, and they can drag people to the bottom of the river. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people that live at the bottom of the river. We see it with drugs, alcohol, depression, suicide, divorce. The list goes on and on and on, right? It ruins marriages, it ruins businesses, it ruins a lot. All because somebody didn't make a decision earlier to let go of something. Because that small rock, they become bigger and bigger and bigger over time, and they become a lot heavier. And if we'd let them go sooner than later, we wouldn't have the problem.
Absolutely. Well, so see difficulty differently.
Yep.
Right? That's number one. Choose or decide to see it differently. Two, the best way to lead is by letting go. Letting go of, I mean, like you said, we could do an entire episode, probably a week's worth, on why people are afraid to let go, what are the top 10 things, etc. So how do you take this as a leader? So I'm gonna decide, let's say I listen to this podcast and I'm I'm inspired. I'm gonna decide to see difficulty differently.
Okay.
I am gonna start taking a look at what I can let go of, what's weighting me down.
Okay.
Then
let's think about it this way. Should we answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. The number one disease, let's call it, or ailment that leaders probably suffer from is probably what? What would you think, Allison? We'll play hangman. It starts with the letter C and it ends with the letter L. CONTROL. It's called control. I live in the world of CEOs, people like Darren and those others. I mean, those are my people. And I speak in groups of these people every week around the whole country. And I can tell you with hands down, the single greatest difficulty that high-level business leaders face is letting go of control. Decision-making capabilities, letting other people try things, letting other people make decisions. That is probably the single most important thing for leaders to let go of is control. And I understand why they're afraid to do so, because they're talented people. And they've been in control of most of everything, and that's how they got the business started in mom's garage 50 years ago with a $2 bill that they borrowed or stole, right? And they grew it. And now it's to the point where it's doing, I don't know, $1 million a year, and it's pretty healthy. The problem is, now you're going to need more help if you want it to grow. And there's only 168 hours in the week. And you have to sleep during some of those, right? So you're limited on time. So if you're not careful, if you don't give away control, you're going to box yourself into a time corner very quickly. Not to mention, you're going to alienate your best people, because your best people want to make decisions. Your best people want to think. They want to try new things. They have ideas you've been looking for 3,000 years, and you wouldn't find it if you lived another 500,000 years. They have the better answer. But if they don't have the ability to express that or try that because you won't let go of control, you'll never know that. So what happens is they'll leave the company. I used to be a headhunter. I have seen this all the time. The single biggest reason why the employee that leaves the company that you don't want to lose, why they leave, is because they got smothered by a control freak. That is very common. I always tell leaders, if you want to get rid of your best people without a lawsuit, just overextend the arm of control. Your best people will leave. Trust me, they're going to want to go, and they're not going to sue you. They're going to go out the door happily.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people have to let this go, because these other people have great ideas. They can actually figure out how to do it better, faster, cheaper, safer, and more effectively than you can. Wow, what a novel idea, right? Let them make decisions, and you'll be pleasantly surprised. Now, will they make mistakes? Because I've had people, well, I can't let them do that because they're going to make a mistake. Well, of course they will. How do you think they're going to learn, right?
Yeah.
Herb Kelleher, the guy that started Southwest Airlines, once said this: no employee at Southwest Airlines will ever be in trouble for making a mistake as long as they were leaning toward the customer. That's an exact quote. I mean, he created an environment where people could try things. People could, hey, look, we're starting here and we got to get there. Figure it out. You know, some of the best people in the world want that. They don't want a roadmap. They don't want instructions. They don't want to paint by numbers. They want a blank canvas. Let me figure it out. Tell me where we are and tell me where we got to go, and shut up and get out of the way. And some of these people have great ideas. And when they discover a better way, it's like putting their fingerprint on the wall. Their DNA is now on the wall. Well, you want employees that are engaged and committed and all in. There's no better reason for me as an employee to go all in all the time than if my fingerprint and my DNA is not on the wall. If my fingerprint and my DNA is on that wall, I own the wall, I'm in, right? I'm thinking and acting like an owner now, which is exactly what they want.
Right.
But they don't have that, because you realize the average level of employee engagement is 30%. 30%. If your kid comes home from school with a report card and it says 30, there's a conversation. I guarantee you that's not acceptable, right?
Exactly.
That's been the average since the day the moon showed up. Gallup has been studying this around the world literally for dozens and dozens of years, and the numbers haven't changed. And a big part of that reason why that score is so low gets back to what we're talking about. Employees want to be able to make decisions and think for themselves. They can't do so if you don't let go of control.
Wow.
I mean, I could go on like a Sunday morning preacher at a church in the Southeast. You know how those preachers are in the churches in the Southeast, right?
Uh-huh. Well, so for you listening, I want to reiterate what Mike just said. The majority of your team is operating at 30% for the most part.
No, if we translate it into what you just said, 70% of your team is not fully engaged. They're showing up. The 6-cylinder engine is showing up firing on 5, 4, 3, or 2 cylinders. 7 out of 10 of your people statistically. Okay.
And that's why I like to ask, to make sure that I understood, and to make sure that the person listening or watching understands. Right. And I would assume, again, this would be a whole nother rabbit hole, but I would assume that the majority of leaders who are afraid to give up control, is it primarily fear? Is that the main driver?
I would say I think part of it's fear. I think part of it is ego. I think part of it is ignorance. I think part of it is, I think it's a multifaceted answer, but I think fear is a whole lot of it. Yeah, because if I'm your boss and I let you make a decision and you blow it, it's going to come back to haunt me, right? So I think fear of what it might do to me, of course, they're trying to protect themselves.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably the most significant part of it, sure.
Well, and we're getting close to the end here, but I feel like there's this one additional part that if I was listening or watching, I would want to know, and what's next? So if I'm a leader, I've decided to see difficulty differently, or now I'm considering it because you've made some good points. You've piqued my interest. This makes sense. I want to lead by letting go because there's a lot of value here. And how do you then translate that? How do you help your people get from good to great? And I know, again, we could talk about that you could talk about it for like a whole week. How could we just summarize or maybe give a couple of suggestions for how to then translate this, connect it to your people?
Okay. I see. So in other words, if I'm a leader and I want my people to go from being good to great, how does what we've talked about, how does that come out in that scenario, right?
Yeah.
I would say this. If I was watching this segment and I realized, okay, I want to let go of some things. I want to be a better leader. I want my people to go from good to great. I would say this. Sit down with some of your people and ask them this question. If there was one change we could make in the role that you play in your job every day that would allow you to be a more authentic version of yourself, to show up every day more authentically as you really are, what change should we make? If there was one thing we could change in the job that you do every day that would allow you to be more authentically who you really are and would also help us do it better, faster, cheaper, safer, or more effectively, what would it be? Anything goes. As long as somebody's not going to end up in the emergency room or in jail. Right. Okay, there are some boundary lines.
Let's keep it legal.
But within the boundary lines, what would you change? And let's try it. And I mean, anything within that confines, anything within those lines goes. And if you make a mistake, there's no consequences. I think the reason people are so fearful of mistakes is not the mistake itself. I think it's the consequence of the mistake.
Absolutely.
Because we live in a penalty-driven world, right? Where if you do this, you get clobbered with a stick. If you don't get this result by this certain time, you're going to get docked. You're going to get penalized. We live in a penalized-based society, which has really set us up to fail in a lot of ways. But I think that's the question I would ask my people to go from good to great. That's one of them.
I love that. And I was just meeting with a client this week. And one thing we were talking about, we had a 2.5-hour drive down to Cumpas, Mexico, to their plant. And so it was plenty of time to chit chat and get to know each other. And one thing we started talking about was the difference between expectations and agreements. And I feel like that if you, as a leader, did what you just suggested. So first and foremost, I would guess that this doesn't happen very often, what you just suggested. Sit down with that person and ask them that question.
Yep.
First of all, brilliant. Mic drop moment. Thank you for that. Second, then they give you the answer. And do you feel it's important to then create an agreement at that stage? Which all I mean is, instead of an expectation can rarely be met because oftentimes the other person doesn't even know what your expectation is. So you're setting them up to fail. Well, I expected you to do this. Well, right. I never knew that. We never talked about it.
Right.
Getting that buy-in, I feel it came into my head. So I feel like that's an element that people could take advantage of as well to then take it to the next level.
Right.
You're giving them permission to fail, and you're creating an agreement together where you're both doing this. I
Right.
feel like that will set them up for even greater success.
You use an interesting word, expectation. One of the other things I think we have to learn to let go of are expectations.
Yes.
Let go of expected outcomes. I didn't say don't have targets. I didn't say don't have goals. But I think we have to let go of it's got to end this way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we let that, because a lot of times it doesn't end the way you think it's going to end or the way you think it should end. You don't get to where, you just don't. Whether it's somebody's fault or circumstances' fault or Biden's fault or Trump's fault or Bows of the Clowns, it doesn't matter, right? Circumstantially or whatever, it didn't end up the way you thought. And people get bent out of shape. And that's another rock they put in the backpack. And boy, they start dumping these rocks in, and man, no wonder they can't go up the hills.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think that, there's a difference between expectations versus an agreement. The agreement is, I want you to try it.
Yeah.
Try it. Well, I'm not sure what to do. We'll just try something. And if you need help, I'll be there. But I want you to take the initiative to try and figure it out. Try something.
That is so empowering. Just even hearing
really is.
say it.
It really is, isn't it?
Ooh, gives me chills.
The employees that you want on your team, that's like putting gasoline on their fire.
Yes.
Now, some people are going to go, I can't. Okay, well, then maybe that person is not the right fit for your team. I mean, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Good point.
They're more of a follower than a leader, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, because we got too many people that are followers, that are leaders, and I mean, we've got it all mixed up because we have to understand some people are better leaders and some people are more creative and some people want to take more chances and some people want to paint on a blank canvas and some want the rules and the boundary lines and the paint by numbers. Well, you have to know who fits what model, and a lot of times you have the wrong person in the wrong model.
Yes, I hear that and see that a lot.
Oh, we could go on and on. We could go on and on about this like so much. It's crazy. I mean, expectations. We could have a whole segment on expectations.
Yeah. Well, in the essence of time, so helping your people get from good to great, taking this new mindset shift that you're going to adopt, and seeing difficulty differently and leading by letting go. So I love it. The first suggestion was to sit down with each person and ask them that very important question. What else? How else do we empower our people?
I would, again, I go back to, if there was a role you could play in the company, any role, what would it be? In 2 years from now, where do you want to be? Not just on the job, but off the job. I think the best leaders in the world address people as people and not as employees. I'll give you an example.
Good one.
One of the best leaders I've ever known in my entire life is a guy who resides in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. His name is Craig Poole. Craig owns a hotel in Reading, Pennsylvania. It's a DoubleTree hotel. It was the highest performing DoubleTree hotel on Earth. On Earth. They won the Conrad Hilton Award, which is the highest award that Hilton gives to any of their hotels worldwide. Okay. They won it 4 times. Okay. Now, you have to understand this. Reading, Pennsylvania is the last place on Earth you would ever think that a highest performing hotel would sit in, because Reading, Pennsylvania is the second poorest city in the United States. It has the second highest crime rate of any city in the country. That's true. I mean, Reading, Pennsylvania is not the place you would think success would be found, but it is, because Craig Poole knows how to lead people. And one of the things Craig's done is he's taken his employees and he's cared about them more as people than he has as employees. I'll give you an example. There's a lady named Christina who's a bartender at the hotel. She's not a real high-paid employee. She's not a real high-level leader carrying a lot of responsibility. She's a bartender. Okay. She's been pretty loyal to Craig in the hotel. One of the things Craig recognized was she really needed some help in her home life.
Mm-hmm.
So he helped her buy a house. And what he did was he set her up to get a home through HUD because she doesn't make a lot of money. And he set this whole thing up. The banker, he got the whole mortgage thing set up for her and everything like that. The bank called Craig one day and said, we have a problem with the loan. Craig said, what's the problem? She doesn't make enough money. How much is she short? By about $5,000 a year. Now, $5,000 may not sound like a lot to some people, but for this lady, Christina, this was a lot of money. And so, and a fairly decent percentage of her annual income. And so, Craig said $5,000. He said, okay, well, effective immediately, she has a $5,000 raise. Any other questions? And the bank guy's like, huh? Craig hung up with the bank guy. He called the HR department of the hotel. He said, effective immediately, change the pay grade. No questions asked, no nothing. Christina owns a home today, and she's not the only one in the hotel that this happened to. The point is, Craig has recognized his people as people, not just as employees. So I think the other thing you have to really think about is, as a leader, how can you make the lives of your employees better? How can you make their spouses better, their kids better, their home life? How can you make them better as people? Because you think Christina is ever going to leave that hotel? Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
She's going to act and think like an owner till the day she dies. She will. Out of gratitude, not out of any other incentive other than the fact that she's grateful that her life was changed. And I think that's a great example that we can all follow. That's a great example and a model that we can implement. We can look at our people and say, what can I do to make their life better? Reach out to their spouse. Talk to their spouse. Send the spouse a thank you card. Hey, thanks for letting us borrow your husband or your wife for a lot of the hours of the day. I realize that he or she spends more time with us than he does with you and your kids. I get that. But we wanted to say thank you for letting us borrow him because he or she has made an incredible contribution, and we wanted you to know that. That's an example of something you can do that doesn't cost $5,000 a year. That costs $1 if you think about it, right? 50 cents for the card and 50 cents for the postage, and you're a hero. There's a lot of little things you can do that are not expensive, not extravagant, and not time-consuming to make a difference in the life of the person you're responsible for. I mean, I could just go, we could talk a whole segment on this. I could give you so many examples of things that people have done over the years and contests. And I mean, you can gamify this. I mean, again, if you're not careful, I could be like an avalanche going downhill on this subject. But I realize we have a limit on this segment.
Well, yeah, gosh, I can't wait to have you back because
we'll do more.
There's
so much
so
more
many. We could jump into each one of these topics and do an entire episode.
Sure, we could.
But is there anything we need to wrap? Is there anything I didn't ask you that you would like to share with our listeners? Or do you feel like we covered the bases in this one for what we set out to do? And
well, I'll tell you one final story that I didn't get to. That's really important because it's all tied into the subject of letting go. So because letting go has been such an important part of my life, not just professionally, but personally, it's really impacted my marriage with Angela and all that, right? Well, Angela's story is interesting. We've been married for 35 years, and she had medical problems from the moment I met her. She had a rock climbing accident in Colorado in 1985. She fell 150 feet off a mountain in Durango. Her bones were broken in like 162 places. I mean, it's a miracle she even lived, but nonetheless, she lived, and we got married in 1990. And she had a lot of medical problems from day one. And one of the medical problems she developed was kidney failure. So she went on dialysis back about 10 years ago. And dialysis is generally not a big deal as long as you do it consistently. because people live for decades on dialysis, or they can get a kidney transplant. I mean, it's not that hard to do. And you take anti-rejection meds and it generally works. Well, Angela developed some pretty severe problems in December of last year. And she'd been to the hospital like 12 times last year. She had a bunch of catheters replaced because she was having blood pressure problems and catheter problems from dialysis. So she went to the hospital on like in early December of last year. And I dropped her off. This is on December the 5th. And I checked her into the hospital, and she was going to have a surgical procedure the next day, and it was like a brake job on a car. So I come home. It's 2:12 in the morning. The phone rings. It's a colorectal surgeon. A surgeon is calling me in the middle of the night, right? The surgeon's the person with the knife, not the doctor, not the nurse. The surgeon's calling me. She says to me, Mike, if I don't do this emergency surgery on Angela's colon right now, she probably won't see the morning. Now imagine if you get that phone call, right? I hang it up with the surgeon. I call Angela immediately. No way. I'm not doing the surgery. I would rather call hospice and go home. And, you know, I was thinking, and I tried to arm wrestle her into the surgery, right? Then I thought, wait a minute, Mike. You know, you've been preaching this letting go forever. Now it's your turn. And what I realized was I was being called to let go of a decision that somebody else made that I didn't like. And then it hit me. How many of us every day have to let go of decisions that somebody else makes that we don't like? Decisions that our kids make that we don't like. Decisions that our employees make that we don't like. Decisions that anybody makes that we don't like. This is why there's so much backlash and fighting politically. They're making decisions we don't like, and we start throwing rocks instead of letting go of it, right? So I let go of it. Now, she lived through the night miraculously. But what we discovered on December 10th, Angela's real problem was not blood pressure and was not catheters. It was a faulty vascular system. Angela's entire vascular system was collapsing. Vascular system means blood vessels, arteries, and veins. They were collapsing. This is why when they would put a needle in her arm, like for a simple blood draw that they do in you and I, they can't get blood half the time. They would put an IV in her, and they would use an ultrasound machine. That's a screen where you can see inside the arm. It goes right into the artery. You can't miss, right? But the IV would not work, because little did they know that artery that they had just put the needle in was collapsing and wasn't functioning. So what she said to me was, on December 10th, we were sitting in the hospital, and she said, Mike, let's look at this. I need colon surgery, I need a kidney transplant, and I need blood transfusions on top of a vascular system that doesn't work. She said, no way. She said, it's time to unplug and go home. Man, I was not having this. I was like, let's try this. Let's try that procedure. Let's pray for a miracle. Let's keep swinging, right? There's baked in mindset in our culture that says, keep fighting at all costs, right? And if you don't, you're a quitter. Well, you know, there's a pretty big difference between quitting and getting knocked out by Mike Tyson. Pretty big difference, right? And so I thought to myself, I'm going to keep fighting. And Angela said, let's assume that we do all the stuff, and let's assume it works. She said, at best, I'll be alive, but I won't be living. She said, Mike, it's time for you to go back in the freezer. It's time for you to let go. That's what she said. She said, my life's going this way. This is the end of my life. I'm going that way. You're going this way. I need you to turn around and go into the difficulty. That's why she said, go back in the freezer. She was trying to get me mentally to go into the difficulty instead of away from it, right? And so I shifted my mind. And she came home from the hospital. She completely unplugged. You have to understand something about kidney functionality. If a dialysis patient unplugs and doesn't do dialysis, they don't live for more than a week. That's how vital your kidneys are to you every minute of every day, because their job is to really filter out poisons out of your blood. That's the main function of a kidney. So if you don't have that going on, toxins and poison basically shuts your whole system down. And so Angela comes home on the 21st of December. And I'm telling you, when she came home, She looked good. She was sitting right here on this couch. I mean, she looked good. She sounded good. She smelled good. It was a conversation like you and I would have, but I knew it was a car without an alternator. I knew it was not going to last. And so I had to set up hospice because I knew where this was headed, right? And hospice doesn't make people better, but at least they help them not suffer. And I brought, the dialysis nurse comes over on 22nd of December. And it's a conversation. I'm thinking, why did I even call this lady? This is such a normal conversation, right? Well, it started to go really downhill, and I had to have her transferred to a hospice care facility on the 26th of December. And on the 28th of December, I'm in there with her, and, you know, she's asleep. She's breathing, but she's asleep. And the doctor's in there with me, and, you know, he's listening to her and all that other stuff. And I said, how long? He said, a couple days. He said, talk to her. Hearing is the last thing to go. She'll understand you, but she may not be able to respond. So I'm talking to her, and I mean, we have a war chest of stories. We've been together for almost 36 years, right? So we have all these stories and concerts and vacations and memories. And at about 11:45 in the morning, I said to her, I'm going to take a break. I'm going to go eat lunch. I'll be back in just a couple of hours. I said, thank you for 34 Christmases. And if you want to go, it's okay. And I left. 15 minutes later, she left. And I thought, now I really know what this means. Now I really know what it means to let go. And I really did let go. And I think letting go, especially when you have to let go of a person in your life, a person that you picked, like your spouse, a person that you produced like a child, those are really, really hard to let go of, right? And you know, it's been what now? It's what's the date today? It's the end of September, right? So it's been January, February, March, April, May, June, July, August. It's been 9 months since Angela left, okay? And my life is going great. I'm working, I'm traveling, I'm making a difference in people's lives. And by Halloween, which is a month away, I'm going to marry somebody else. I started dating in March, and my mom was like, oh my God, you can't start doing that. Oh, this was the funniest conversation. I said, why not, Mom? She said, it's too soon. I said, what's the definition of soon? And of course, there's no answer to that question. Mm-hmm. I started dating people, and I met somebody on Facebook, fell in love with her. She lived in Los Angeles. I would take the train up, drive up, whatever. And she's the best thing that ever happened to me. And I could never have gotten to this point. You know, I don't have any alcohol in my house. I don't have any drugs. I'm not hiding in a cave, right? I've learned to let Angela go. It was a 34-year chapter of my life. You have to let go of a previous chapter if you're going to turn the page and start a new one. And a lot of people can't do this. A lot of people. I have personal friends who've lost their spouse long before I lost mine. And they're still depressed, drinking, therapy, drugs. I mean, they're stuck. They're totally, and they don't want to be stuck, but they haven't learned to let go. And I think to myself, well, you know, the lessons I've learned from Shackleton, including how to put on a different lens and see things differently on the other side. I mean, these are all things that I have control over that I did that I think really enabled me to turn the page of that chapter of my life and start a new one. And I think letting go has been the key to this whole thing. And I'll tell you, when you lose a spouse and you have to let go of a spouse, that's about the highest degree of difficulty that there is when it comes to letting go, because I picked her. I mean, my parents are still alive, and I'm sure it's going to be hard when they go. And for people that are watching, you know what I'm talking about. If you've lost both of your parents, it's hard. I have to think it's got to be harder to let go of Angela than it will be to see my dad go. Because I love my dad, but I didn't pick him, right? When you pick somebody, it's different. Right. And I just think to myself, the reason why I'm in the state where I am is because I learned to let go. And I learned it from a guy named Shackleton, who lived in 1914, that got stuck in Antarctica. And I happened to run into the story by random chance 20 years ago in a bookstore. And little did I know that 10-minute period would change everything. And I mean everything, including how I let go of a spouse. I mean, letting go it's the most important thing in the world.
Wow. I have no words, which is rare for me. Thank you.
Some stories tend to do that to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that.
Well, thank you
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
for your energy, for your experience, for sharing your story, and for teaching us some really great things that we can put into play today. We can start
You're welcome.
today.
We can.
And we can build a better life, which in turn, I think helps us build a better business. So, gosh, thank you, Mike. I'm already
welcome.
looking forward to the next time. And you've
There'll be a lot more.
You've brought so much. So appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Well, and for you listening or watching, we just want to say to you a huge thanks, because you have so many ways that you can spend your time. And the fact that you chose to invest some time in yourself and your business today and spend a little time with us means the world, because we do this for you. So just wanted to say thank you. And if nobody else tells you this week, keep going, because you matter. The work that you do matters.
If you're not already, subscribe to the Manufacturing Masters podcast on Apple Music or Spotify. And for a deeper dive, head on over to manufacturing-masters.com. It's everything they never taught you in school.